In a room full of rank, titles, and procedure, the only person willing to speak the truth is the newest nurse in the hospital. Lena risks her job to challenge authority and save a patient everyone else has already begun to lose. Then the real danger arrives. Not the wound in his chest, but the system surrounding him. This story is a sharp collision of ethics, courage, and the terrifying price of doing the right thing when powerful people need silence.
The chart slapped the steel tray. Reynolds jabbed a finger at Lena. His command was sharp. "Get her out! I want no boot nurse on my patient." His tone was surgical steel. Silence locked the room. No pulse, 0 BP. Every monitor shrieked the final, ugly truth. The crew had thrown everything they had at him. They were about to call it a warrior lost, not overseas, but here. If this story gets to you, subscribe to see how it ends. Comment with your city. I want to see how far this goes. The moment Lena Foster entered Metro Health Military Hospital, her eyes stayed locked forward. She ignored the gallery of heroes on the walls, the sterile decor. She shifted her pack, checked her watch, 6:54, 6 minutes early, and found the main desk. A new gig was the least of her worries. A junior nurse named Priya glanced up, her eyes widening at Lena's stature before she offered a meek smile. "You must be the new hire, Lena?" "That is me." Priya slid a lanyard her way. "Welcome aboard. Dr. Reynolds is lead trauma, and he is on the warpath." "How bad of one." Priya's voice dropped to a whisper, the kind that had a resident crying before 0800 last week. "Just keep your head down, don't be a hero. It is the only way to make it here." Lena took the lanyard and clipped it to her scrubs. The ER at Metro Health was a place without quiet. It was the catch-all for 3 counties of active duty personnel, their families, and vets. It handled injuries most hospitals never saw, from blast wounds to deep-seated PTSD. The bedlam was just another Tuesday. Lena moved through the morning with cool precision. She ran vitals, updated charts, and fielded every question with quiet authority. A senior nurse, Marcus, watched her for a full 20 minutes before he walked over. "You have done this before," he said, a statement, not a question. "Done what before?" Lena asked, her attention on an IV drip. This whole world. You move like a seasoned pro." "I was trained well," she said. Marcus paused, gave a slow nod, and then walked off. There was an air about Lena Foster that just shut down questions. By noon they had processed 14 patients. Minor breaks, a burn, 2 concussions, a slow day. Then the radio squawked to life. Lena was charting when the call came through. She heard it first. "Incoming medevac, multiple GSWs, convoy hit. ETA is 11 mics." She dropped her chart and moved for the trauma bay. Marcus cut her off. "New boots stay out of the bay their first week. It is regs. I read the regs. Then you are on triage support. Here." He met her stare. "Roger that." She stayed put, but her gaze was fixed on the entrance. The rig screamed up in 9 minutes. The pit detonated into controlled chaos. Doctors sprinted, nurses yelled blood types, and residents tried to manage the surge. 6 casualties arrived. 4 were bad, 2 were critical. Lena directed the flow with a silent, unnerving efficiency. She missed nothing. The grunt in Bay 2 hiding his agony behind a stone mask. The corpsman whose vacant stare screamed TBI before anyone else saw it. She flagged both without being asked. A gurney slammed in with the 3rd wave. She heard the raw edge in the medic's voice. He flatlined twice en route. "We got him back, but his pressure has been in the toilet for 20 mics. GSW to the chest. Sucking chest wound, heavy bleed." A young medic with bloody gloves spoke to the nearest doctor. "He is a frogman, special warfare. Sergeant Jack Harris." The trauma team descended on him. Dr. Reynolds was already there, his command absolute, forged in 30 years of this fight. He barked orders, pointed, never asked. Lena felt herself pulled to the edge of the trauma bay, a place she was not allowed. Her station was 30 feet away, but instinct was a magnet. Her gaze locked on the man on the table, absolute. Even out cold, Gunnery Sergeant Harris had that unbreakable marine frame, but his skin was a chalky grey, and his breathing was a ragged hitch, the telltale sign the chest seal was failing. She saw it then, the subtle shift of his neck, the tracheal deviation. A tension pneumo was closing in, killing him faster than the bullet wound. "Pressure's tanking!" someone shouted. 70/40. "Hang another unit of ONEG," Reynolds snapped. "X-ray? 2 mics! We don't have 2. Get me the probe now." Lena edged into the room and stopped. She saw the probe on Jack's chest. She saw Reynolds's sharp, furious exhale. She saw the resident staring at the screen, utterly lost. And she watched the monitor trace its grim, flat path. "No perfusion," Reynolds grunted. His heart's failing. "Thoracotomy?" the resident stammered. "Not yet." The alarm screamed a higher pitch. "He is in V-fib?" What followed was precise mayhem, paddles charging. Clear! A jolt, then another. The flat line jumped to a weak, chaotic wave. It bought them seconds, not a life. "Hit him again," Reynolds ordered, his voice frayed. Everyone there was an expert. Lena saw their skill, and she saw their blind spot. The two things warred inside her. 60/30, a nurse called. "He is circling the drain." Reynolds went dead quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollowed out by defeat. "Prep for a code, page cardio, and get the chaplain." The last word hung there like a death sentence. An absolute stillness fell. Lena crossed the threshold. She saw Jack Harris, his chest doing that wrong, shallow dance. She saw his slack hands and the monitor ticking away his last seconds. And she felt it again, a feeling she had not known in years. Not fear, but a cold, hard purpose. It was a complete certainty. "He is not gone," she said. Her quiet words cut the tension like a knife. 3 heads turned, Reynolds' included. He stared, his face a grim mask. "Who the hell are you?" "Lena Foster." "I am a new nurse, and you are not welcome in this bay. Out." "Respectfully, sir, his trachea is deviated. You are missing the tension pneumo." I said, "Out." His voice was a whip crack. "Now. Get her out of my trauma bay. I will not have a boot touching him." Nobody budged. It was not insubordination. Her stark calm was more commanding than his rage. Reynolds stepped to her. That was not a request. "Get out now, or I will have the MPs drag you out. Do you copy?" Lena's gaze shifted from him to Jack, and back. "His trachea is deviated. He has a tension pneumo on the left. In 90 seconds his heart will give out, and he is not coming back." Her voice was unwavering steel. "So you can have me removed, or you can check his chest. You do not have the time to do both." A crushing silence descended on the room. Reynolds just glared. The resident next to him was in shock. Marcus, still in the doorway, was a statue. A new, piercing alarm shattered the quiet. "Pressure's down to 50, the nurse cried, her voice thin. Reynolds was frozen for a heartbeat. Then he seized a decompression needle kit and shoved it into Lena's hands. "If you miss," he hissed, "your career is over." She took it and moved to Jack's left side, her hands as steady as stone. They were always steady. She found the spot by touch, aimed and pushed. The hiss of air was loud and clear. On the screen the pressure began to climb, slow at first, then sure. 60, 70, 75. No one in the room drew a breath. Lena stepped back, setting the kit on the tray. Jack's breathing lost its frantic rhythm, finding a deeper, more natural one. The grey pallor of his skin started to recede. He was still critical, still bleeding, his life on a knife's edge. But he was back. "Foster," Reynolds said, the name a sharp report in the quiet room. She met his gaze. He paused. "Stay." And so she stayed. For the next 40 minutes she moved with the trauma team as if she had always been there. She never overstepped or questioned Reynolds, but when she saw something, she called it. Each time, she was dead on, adjusting a vasopressor drip, suggesting a new position for blood flow. She even repacked a chest wound that a field medic had applied wrong. The resident, Dr. Cho, watched her with open reverence. "Where did you learn that?" he asked in a quiet moment. "Field work," Lena answered, her voice flat. "What kind of field?" She didn't answer. 42 minutes after she had stepped in, Jack Harris was stable. He wasn't out of the woods, he needed surgery, a lot of luck. But he was holding. His heart found a strong rhythm, his pressure held, and colour was slowly returning to his face. Reynolds stepped back from the bed. He stripped off his bloody gloves, his eyes moving from the patient to the woman who stood opposite him. His usual stone-faced expression had cracked. What lay beneath it was not anger. "Clear the room," he commanded. The team filed out, the adrenaline leaving them bone-weary. Marcus left with them, but shot a final, long look at Lena from the doorway. When they were alone, Reynolds walked toward her, stopping just 2 feet away. They stood at nearly the same height. "Your file says you got your nursing degree from Jefferson Health 18 months back," he said. "Correct. It also says you have 0 prior clinical experience." "That is also correct." His gaze drilled into her. "That needle decompression was textbook tactical combat casualty care. They do not teach that in nursing school. And that wound packing is a spec ops move. I have only seen JSOC operators use it." The silence grew, filled only by the steady beep of the cardiac monitor. 2 hours before, everyone in that bay had given Jack Harris up for dead. Lena held Reynolds' stare for a long moment, then glanced at Jack. "He is going to need a surgeon within the next 4 hours. That field dressing won't hold his subclavian," she continued, "and his lung needs monitoring. I want breath sounds checked every 30 minutes. Reynolds didn't push. "Paging thoracic," he said, turning and pausing at the door. Without looking back, he spoke. "Good call on the pneumo, Foster." Not an apology, but from him it was a damn monument. Lena pulled a chair to Jack's side. She sat, studying his face, pale, broken, but breathing. Against all logic, he was still breathing. His hands were slack on the sterile white sheet. The right one bore a telltale scar, a thin line from one bad day in one specific hellhole. Her expression was a blank slate. She sat, hands clasped, watching the steady rhythm of his heart on the monitor. Outside, the ER's controlled chaos resumed, but here there was only the hum of machines, the man in the bed, and the woman beside him. Her hand drifted to her scrub pocket, finding only empty fabric. No shock there. She hadn't carried them in years, yet her fingers lingered, a ghost of an old habit. Jack's vitals held steady. He clung to life with a bull-headed grit, his body defying the inevitable. Lena was quiet. 15 minutes passed before Dr. Cho returned. He was mid-20s, his face not yet hammered into steel by the job. He clutched a tablet, his curiosity practically radiating off him. "Thoracic is inbound, ETA 40 minutes, he stated. "Good," she said flatly. Cho lingered, his gaze bouncing between the patient and her. "Mind if I ask something?" he finally ventured. "You can. When Reynolds told you to stand down, you didn't. Why?" He asked it like a man trying to decipher a code. Anyone else would have bailed. Lena waited a beat. "Most people," she said, her eyes on Jack, missed what was right in front of them. And what was that? A man who refused to die. Cho absorbed this, nodding as he filed it away before leaving. Lena resumed her watch. She catalogued the scar, the set of his shoulders, small tells invisible to most. Leaning forward, she rested her forearms on her knees and let out a word, a whisper barely louder than air. It was meant for him alone. Falcon. The name was a key from another lifetime, a call sign. On the monitor, the steady pulse of his heart spiked a tiny flicker, but it was there. The trace on the screen found a new energy, as if some buried part of him heard and acknowledged the signal. Lena leaned back, silent. She folded her hands again and waited as Sergeant Jack Harris fought. It wasn't a movie miracle, no sudden awakening. It was a subtle shift in rhythm. The line pulsed with more intent, the beeps stronger, like a man in a deep dark turning toward a familiar voice. Lena saw it, and said nothing. She settled back in, hands locked, her face a stone mask. Years ago, she'd learned your face was a tactical liability. She'd been waiting 6 minutes when Marcus materialized in the doorway. He stayed put, leaning in the frame with his arms crossed, watching her watch the body. He looked like a man redrawing all his maps. "Reynolds wants a debrief in 20, he stated. "I'll be there," Lena said. Marcus held his ground, his gaze shifting from the monitor to her. "How'd you see it?" he asked. "The pneumo." His trachea looked dead center. "It was off by 3 millimeters, she answered. "You just have to know what to look for." "And you did." She met his eyes. "Yes." He uncrossed his arms, then crossed them again, a war playing out behind his eyes. "Where'd you do your trauma rotation?" "File," says Jefferson. "They don't teach you a needle decompression in under 45 seconds there." Lena held his stare. It wasn't a standard rotation. "Unconventional?" Marcus repeated the word like it was foreign. "I'll be at the debrief in 20, she repeated. He sized her up for another second, then he broke contact. His steps receded down the hall. 41 minutes after she whispered that single word, Jack Harris's eyes moved. Not open, just a flutter under the lids, a faint signal from a man climbing out of the abyss. His right hand, the one with the burn scar, twitched on the sheet. The fingers curled and uncurled, grasping for a weapon that wasn't there. Lena leaned in. "Harris," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "You're in a hospital. You're secure. Stand down." His head shifted. "Keep your head still," she commanded, her tone unyielding. The hand on the bed went still. His pressure was 88/54 low, but miles from the red zone. His breathing evened out. O2 sats hit 91% and climbed. His body was now fighting the war. Lena watched with what appeared to be clinical detachment, but it was a lie. She was rigid because the emotion was a tidal wave. She'd mastered that trick in places where feeling got you killed. You buried it deep, locked it down. You kept your voice steady, your hands sure. You did the job. Later, if you were lucky, you'd let a crack of it out in private. She thought that part of her life was over. Not here. Life, she knew, doesn't give a damn about your plans. Dr. Cho returned at the 20-minute mark with a thoracic surgeon. Dr. Park was a compact woman in her 40s who moved with zero wasted motion. Park took the tablet, glanced at the patient, then Lena, then Cho. "She's the one who placed the needle?" Park asked. "Yes," Cho confirmed. Park's next look at Lena was different. It wasn't a superior looking at a subordinate. It was peer-to-peer respect. "Good call," she said. A few more minutes and that tension would have collapsed his whole chest. This would be a much darker debrief. "I'm aware," Lena said. A small, tight smile hit Park's lips. "We're taking him to OR2 for a subclavian repair. His pressure needs to hold for the move." She glanced at the screen. "Think he's got it in him?" Move him in 15, Lena said, and his system will rally, then crash. He needs the knife before he bottoms out. Park watched her. You've got a lot of certainty for a nurse. On this, I do, Lena confirmed. Park turned to Cho. Get OR2 prepped. We're on our way. Looking back at Lena, she added, Care to scrub in? The invitation hung in the air. Cho's eyes went wide. Lena's face was unreadable, but a brief hunger flashed in her eyes before it was gone. I'm not credentialed for that, she stated. I read your file, Park countered. I'm not asking about credentials. I'm asking what you want to do. The silence stretched for 2 seconds before Lena stood. Show me the sinks. The debrief with Reynolds never happened. Just as they rolled Jack to OR2, the ER got slammed by a rollover MVC and a soldier with chest pains, dragging Reynolds back into the fray. Lena learned that was the rhythm of this place. Calm was just the pause between storms. The hospital was a living thing. The moment you relaxed, it sucked the air out of the room. In the OR, she stood just outside the sterile field, running interference for Park clamps, suction, pressure. She called out Jack's vitals with a cool authority that had the tech looking over twice. Not your first rodeo, he observed. Did a lot of work in the field, Lena replied under her breath. He assumed military. She let him. The tech, a guy in his 30s, just nodded and focused on his tools. Park moved like a bomb tech, locating and repairing the subclavian tear. Then a second bleeder. She lingered over the chest cavity, her focus absolute. There's old scarring here, she announced. Adhesions from a prior major trauma. She probed the tissue. Looks like he survived an untreated hemothorax not too long ago. Her eyes met Lena's over the table. You familiar with his jacket? Lena's gaze remained on the open chest. He's active special operations. That jacket is blacked out. Right, Park said, getting back to work. Well, whatever happened, somebody patched him up with next to nothing. The scarring is a master class in battlefield medicine. She paused. Damn brilliant, actually. Lena didn't reply, but her grip tightened on a retractor. Jack Harris was wheeled out of OR2 at 1947 hours, after 2 hours and 19 minutes under the knife. He was breathing on his own, a fact Park called a damn fine surprise. His blood pressure held steady with a grit, the anesthesiologist, Dr. Awoke, noted in the chart. They moved him to the surgical ICU on the 3rd floor. Lena walked the gurney to the elevators and stopped. She'd been on her feet for 13 hours. Her shift ended 2 hours ago. She had no authority in the SICU. She had no business on that lift. She buzzed the door. The surgical ICU was configured with 4 bays and 2 isolation units for the worst cases. Jack was in private room 1, a glass box that bristled with monitors like a forward command post. The charge nurse, Gloria, a woman with the steady bearing of a master sergeant, glanced at Lena's credentials. Day crew, she stated. I know, Lena returned. You're the one who caught the collapsed lung. That's right. Gloria sized her up, then nodded toward the room. He's fighting it. Not awake, but thrashing. Keeps ripping at his lines. We've had to strap him down twice. He's stubborn, Lena noted. Most of them are, Gloria said. Doesn't always save them. She turned back to her console. You can go in. But don't you lay a hand on anything without clearing it with me first. Lena entered. Bound by tubes and wires, Jack Harris was a different entity. Not a casualty, but a battlefield between this world and the next. His color was better. The ashen mask was gone. His own respirations set a solid tempo, taking over from the ventilator's forced rhythm. She stood watch from a chair, her hand drifting toward a pocket that wasn't there. She stopped the movement, her hand coming to rest on her chest. Always a damn hardhead, she muttered. On the cot, his taped hand spasmed, fingers closing on empty air. She laid her hand on his, a point of anchor, not comfort. He was too far gone to feel it, but the restless searching ceased. The monitor's rhythmic pulse became a truce. Gloria's voice from the nurse's station cut the quiet. She gave the glass a single, sharp rap. "Dr. Reynolds wants you." Lena pulled her hand back, scanned his vitals out of habit, and moved to the door. Reynolds was in the hall, still in his surgical greens, looking like a field commander after a protracted firefight. The day's battle was gouged into the lines on his face. "A moment," he said as she came out. They moved past the humming activity of the nurse's station, heading for the quiet end of the hall. He stopped by a window and faced her. He put his hands in his pockets. "I pulled your service record." She'd figured as much. "It's clean," he said. "Top of your class, glowing evals, a year in a civilian trauma center. No black holes, a solid record," she agreed. "A record that says 0 about performing a needle thoracostomy in 45 seconds flat," he countered. "Or about having instincts Dr. Park called the best she's seen from a non-resident in 5 years. "This is off the books," Reynolds went on, his voice dropping low. "This chat isn't happening. It will never make it into a report. I have one question." She waited. "The man in there," he gestured with his head. "Sergeant Harris? Is he your responsibility?" The low hum of the hospital faded into nothing. Her answer was precise, sterile. "Not in any capacity that would compromise my duties here." He held her gaze, his own unreadable, then gave a sharp nod. "Get some rest, Foster. Your shift begins at 0700. Lena stayed at the window. The cool glass was an anchor. In the lot below, an army truck sat under the orange glow of the lamps, a ghost from another life. She dropped her hand to her side. She returned to the SICU. Gloria just lifted an eyebrow. Soon, Lena answered the unspoken question. The charge nurse glanced at the patient, her professional armor cracking to show a sliver of empathy. For 11 years she had stood this watch, a witness to every kind of vigil. She passed Lena a styrofoam cup of black coffee. Lena took it and resumed her post, the machines ticking away the seconds. At 21:47, a time she noted for the sake of discipline, Harris made a noise. It wasn't just breath. It was the raw shape of a word sent up from the depth. She was on her feet, leaning over the bed. Harris. His eyelids trembled, fighting their way out of a deep, dark trench. "Harris," she repeated, her voice a solid object in the fog. "You're at Metro Health. You're out of surgery." His mouth worked. A rough, torn sound emerged, not a real word. But she heard it. She heard it clear as a bell. Shadow. Not her name. A call sign. A designation buried in a black site server 1,000 miles away. A name she hadn't answered to in 2.5 years. A knot formed in her throat, a vulnerability she crushed instantly. She leaned closer, her voice for his ears only. "I'm here. You're clear. Stand down." His hand twitched again. She took it. His fingers tightened on hers. Gloria was watching from the window. Lena gave her a curt one-handed signal. "Back off." Gloria froze. The grip was faint, but it was conscious, not a reflex. He was surfacing, clawing his way up, desperate for air and reality. His eyelids gave one more hard shove. They opened. His eyes were the color of a stormy sea, clouded with drugs and the whiplash of being ripped from one reality to another. They scanned the room, then locked on her. The haze was still there, but a new light cut through it, something sharper than recognition, older than confusion. "You're KIA," he rasped, his voice shredded gravel. "I know," she said. "You're here," he stated, needing to ground himself. "I'm here." He let his eyes close, not falling back into unconsciousness, but arriving at a hard-won shore. His hand stayed locked with hers. Gloria entered, her movements practiced but now tinged with a quiet respect. She left, Pulling the door closed with a gentleness that was louder than words. Lena sat with him for another 40 minutes, until his vitals were solid, until his grip went slack with genuine sleep, until the operator in her gut confirmed he was past the breaking point. Then she stood. She tugged her uniform straight, gave his still face a final tactical scan, and exited the room. At the elevators, the car arrived without a sound. She stepped inside, and as the doors slid shut, she finally released a single, tight breath that felt as heavy as stone. As the elevator descended, Sergeant Jack Harris remained in the SICU, breathing, stable, alive. She got 4 hours and 40 minutes of rack time, not enough, but all her training would allow before the internal alarm went off at 05:17. A familiar jolt from a decade-on alert. Waking up was a hard cut, not a slow burn. For exactly 30 seconds she lay still in the safe house room Marcus had arranged, mapping the hospital's dawn acoustics. The hum of electricity, the glide of gurney wheels, and the crackle of an intercom. The sounds were a known system, not a comfort, and she operated best within systems. Then she was up. Cold water on her face, clean scrubs on, she took the fire stairs to the 3rd floor. Gloria was on duty. The unit had survived the night. The stairwell door clicked behind her. Gloria glanced up, registered Lena's arrival, and went back to her monitor. The coffee beside her was steaming. The woman was a fortress of procedure, a trait Lena respected but could never possess. Room 1. Lena paused at the glass. Jack was conscious, though not moving. The chest tubes and sheer exhaustion kept him pinned down, but his eyes were open, tracking. His right hand was placed deliberately over his heart. His head was angled toward the door. He'd been waiting. "Still here," he said, his voice a low rumble, far stronger than it was at 21:47. IV fluids and rest were working their slow, brutal magic. "I was off duty," she said. "But you came back. My tour starts at 7. She moved to the chair by his bed, her eyes sweeping the monitor by ingrained habit. Blood pressure was 94/61, heart rate at 68. An upward trend. Not great, but better the only direction that counted. He saw her check the readouts. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Still doing it. Doing what? Recon before engagement. She sat, meeting his stare. Pain. Manageable. So it's bad, she translated. He looked at the ceiling tiles. It's bad, he admitted. Had worse. I know, she said, and the years of shared history filled the space between them. He looked at her again, his face stripped bare with the honesty of a man just 12 hours back from the dead. He was never a soft man, but his usual defences, the quick joke, the professional wall were gone, scoured away, leaving just the raw mechanics of a body trying to reboot. How long? Have you been stationed here? He finished. Metro Health. Yesterday was day 1, she told him. His expression shifted, not surprise, but the rapid re-evaluation of a suddenly changed battlefield. Day 1, he echoed. Roger that. And they assigned you to the ER, standard procedure for new boots on the ground. He watched her, his gaze unwavering. And I was the objective. You were the objective, she confirmed. Silence stretched. Lena, he said, the name a confirmation of reality. What are the damn odds? Infinitesimal, she replied. But not 0, obviously. He exhaled, carefully negotiating with the pain. You're not going to call this a coincidence, are you? No, she said flatly. I'm calling it irrelevant. You're mission capable. That's the only data that matters right now. His jaw set. She recognized the look he was processing, looking for an angle. She held his gaze and waited. You used my call sign, he said at last. Back in the ER, before they brought me up. I used your name, she corrected. My sign, he insisted, his voice hard. I heard it, cut right through the noise. He paused. Nobody at this hospital knows that sign. And around here, no one knows you were ever in the field. Her eyes met his. That's a fact. He shut his eyes, not resting, but letting his mind run operations free of his broken frame. His fingers twitched on his chest. When? He breathed, eyes still closed. When what? Did you get out? 2.5 years ago, she said. He opened his eyes. The program. Yes, the program. A protocol never said aloud for making assets disappear into quiet lives. A clean slate. Lena's own exit was managed by 3 people, none of them here. Jack, knowing about it, was proof of the clearance he still had. They cut you loose, he stated. I requested to be taken off the board, she corrected. Not the same thing. Why? She glanced at her hands, then back at him. I was too good at the work, she said, and being that effective was turning me into something I couldn't be. The truth hung between them. He didn't question it. He'd seen enough not to need the details, a quality she'd always respected. He didn't have to pretend to get it. He just knew. Anyone on this post know? He asked. No. The CO Reynolds is wary. He's also smart enough not to poke the bear. For now. For now, Jack echoed. For now, she agreed. He went quiet. Then, I've got a situation to report. The sharp turn in his tone activated her training. She didn't so much as flinch, but her body went rigid. The convoy, Jack said, his voice changing from a patient's rasp to the flat tone of a briefing. It wasn't a random hit. Jack, you need to... His right hand moved from his chest to the bed rail, the grip weak but solid. It was a planned strike, he said. 3 kill zones across a 4-mile stretch. They had our route, our schedule. He took a breath. They had our goddamn personnel roster. A cold knot formed in Lena's stomach. She kept her expression a blank mask. A leak. A confirmed breach, he corrected. High level. They knew the exact window in our air cover. His eyes bored into hers, sharp with desperation. I lost 3 men, Lena. The source knew exactly when and where to hit us. You filed an AAR. Sent up what I could before medevac, he said, his teeth clenched. But there's a problem. She waited. Someone on my report's distro list, he said, dragging the words out, is outside my command structure. Someone who can bury this whole thing. Lena was still. The monitor kept its steady, rhythmic pulse. A utility cart rattled down the hallway, a noise from a different world, completely detached from the intel exchange happening in this room. You're telling me this now? Here? I'm telling you because I don't know when some ranking officer is going to walk in for my official debrief, he said, his stare intense. And because you're the only person in this hospital who I'm certain is not on any active roster. The task he was handing her felt like a lead weight in her gut. She looked at him, at the machinery, at the tubes that were keeping him here, and she understood. She considered the quiet, anonymous life she had built. She could feel it fracturing, like ice groaning under pressure. "Who knows you're on this base?" she asked. "Medics? The command center? And whoever they report to? Which might be the name on your list?" "And on mine," his look replied. She rose in one smooth motion, the choice already made. "You have to recover," she commanded silently. "Your pressure needs to stabilize. Your sats have to climb. Your body has to heal. None of that happens while you're redlining. So you will shut up and you will close your eyes." "Lena, that is a direct order," she thought, her internal voice as firm as it was in the ER. "You put me back in play. I'm here. But I can't do my job if you're fighting me. Now lie still. Let your body work." He met her gaze for a long count. Then, with the pained slowness of a man at war with himself, he let go. "You always had more command presence than you let on," he breathed. "Rest," she said again. He did. She stood there until his breathing deepened. About 3 minutes. Then she strode out of the room, her movements measured and unreadable, her professional demeanour locked down. At the nurse's station, Gloria was in the middle of handover to the day shift lead. Daniel, a man whose calm was forged over 20 years in this place. He watched Lena come out of room 1. "You look like you need a coffee IV. I need an air-gapped terminal," she said. Daniel paused. "We've got terminals." "A closed network," she clarified. "One that's firewalled from the main hospital grid." He sized her up for a second. "Admin has one in the 3rd floor annex for sensitive files. That needs Reynolds's authorization." "I'll get it," she stated. She took the stairs, finding Reynolds in his office at 0649. That meant he'd either pulled an all-nighter or got here before dawn. Both were standard operating procedure for the man in charge of Metro's trauma center. He sat at his desk with coffee, facing a wall of patient charts. He looked up when she knocked, his face saying he expected a tough conversation, just not this damn early. "Foster," he said. "I need the annex terminal on 3, she said flatly. He put his mug down. "That terminal is for classified medical records." "I'm aware," she answered. "It requires my personal keycard." "I know that as well." He watched her. The morning light was sterile, highlighting the silver at his temples, and the lines etched by years of impossible choices. He was exactly as he appeared. A man who'd spent 3 decades in rooms where fates were decided, with an unerring sense for the true stakes. "Is this about Harris?" he asked. "It's a patient security matter," she deflected. "That's not a real answer." "Doctor." "Reynolds." She held his stare. "I need access. I can't explain why, and you're sharp enough to know that's the point. I am cashing in the trust I earned yesterday." The office was dead quiet. Reynolds lifted his mug, then set it back down, untouched. He clicked his pen. For a guy like him, those clicks were a full negotiation. He unlocked a desk drawer and slid a keycard over. She picked it up. "Whatever this is," he said quietly, "you are one of my staff. If this puts my people in the crossfire, you will tell me first." "Understood," she replied. In the server room, it took her all of 6 minutes. She wasn't a cyber warfare tech, but she was trained to read the shape of data in the dark, to see its outline without leaving a trace. At 0658, that outline told a damning tale. Jack's convoy was a black op, its logistics sealed behind command-level encryption. The route was set 72 hours out, passing through 7 sets of hands. 7 people had the complete intel package. The hit was too clean. The leak had the master file. She pulled the distribution list, and the name was right there. For 30 seconds she was frozen. Then she scrubbed her digital signature. She slipped the card into her pocket and went back to the 3rd floor, to the same window where Reynolds had just grilled her. Her fingers brushed the cold glass, a reflection of last night. She forced a slow breath. The name on that list wasn't some boot lieutenant. This was not a problem you could just make go away. It was a name that made colonels and generals choose their words very, very carefully. And that person knew Jack Harris was alive, which meant they knew exactly where to find him. She pulled out her phone, stared at the screen, then put it away, pulled it out again. Her contact list belonged to Lena Foster, RN. That Lena didn't have the numbers she needed now. She'd torched that life 30 months ago. She gave the ghost a final 15 seconds, then put it down for good. She did a quick tactical assessment. The hospital, the doctor's fragile trust. A secure ICU with a single point of entry, run by a charge nurse with a combat vet's instincts, who knew a military hospital could become a kill box. She had Jack. still breathing. And she had herself. It had been enough in the past. She pushed off the window and walked back to the SICU. At 07:14, Marcus showed up, finding Lena at the wrong desk, her focus on Jack's chart a solid wall. He moved to her side. "Schedule says you're in the ER." "I'm needed here this morning," she said without looking up. "The ER's getting hit hard, Marcus." Her eyes came up to meet his, her tone all business. "You knew something was wrong yesterday. You felt it before the helicopter even landed. And you know I'm not just some new nurse." He stayed silent. "I'm not asking for the full story," she said. "I'm asking you to trust your gut. Whatever is happening, I'm the reason that man's still alive, and I need to stay with him." Marcus's gaze shifted from her to the chart to the glass of room 1. Inside, Jack was a still life, his vitals a cold, hard fact on the screens above him. "I'll cover your ER shift until 1200 hours," Marcus said. "Then I need a sitrep. By noon," Lena promised silently, "you'll have it." He gave her a final hard look, then headed for the elevator. It was 07:22. Lena began charting, her notes flawless, the perfect cover. As her hands moved, her mind was a war room replaying the name. She mapped out the threat, knowing the fate of soldiers who report that the rot is coming from inside the command structure. At 07:31, the SICU doors swished open. Daniel, done with his handover, walked out. He paused by her station. "Ward's quiet," he said. "Harris in 1 bears watching. BP is up, but he needs labs at 0800 and a chest film before 9. I've got it. You sure you ought to be here?" "I've got it," she said again, her voice shutting down any further debate. He gave a short nod and was gone. The unit settled. Lena moved with quiet efficiency, checking her other patients, briefing the new resident at 07:45, then drawing Jack's labs. "Find it?" he asked, while she prepped vials. She kept her focus. "Not your concern." "So, yes," he pressed. "It means not yet," she snapped. He studied her. "How bad?" She sealed a tube, their eyes locking. "Contained." He knew the word. The ghost of his smirk surfaced. "Throw in my own lingo at me? Learned from some hard-headed jarhead," she said, squaring away the medkit. "Get some rack time. Orders." She turned for the hatch, but froze. "Jack, glad to see you didn't buy the farm." A tense beat passed. His voice was pure gravel. Likewise, the hatch hissed shut. At 8:47, the buzz from the comms center was a silent siren only Sergeant Miller could hear. "Got a man at the desk," Priya said. "Says he's from Harris's unit. Asking for the attending." Lena's hand crushed the phone. "Rank?" she bit out. "Didn't offer one," Priya replied, her voice strained. "Just showed his credentials," wanted the doctor. "Get Dr. Reynolds," Lena ordered. "Now, he stays downstairs." "Roger, is every tell Reynolds," Lena cut in, ending the transmission. Through the glass, Jack was awake. His gaze was fixed on the ceiling, his frame rigid. A soldier's instinct for an unseen threat vector. His eyes found hers. She held up a flat hand, the universal signal to hold fast. He gave a slight nod. Lena dialed Reynolds and delivered 6 words in a monotone. "Do not let him come up here." To her immense relief, Reynolds didn't hesitate. He didn't question, ignoring the gulf in their positions. He just asked, "How much time you need?" She answered. 20 mics. You have 15, he stated, and disconnected. She was already in the room. Jack's eyes were alert, tactical. "We've got brass on deck 1, she reported. "I heard." "No rank given," she went on. "Just ID. Asked for you and the doc." His jaw tightened. "Name?" Priya couldn't get one. She drew closer. "I need you focused." The route manifest for the convoy listed 7 names. "I knew 4 of them," he said. Other three were command level. The name at the top of that chain, she said, was Colonel Richard Voss. A look she'd never seen took over his face. She had witnessed his actions under fire, seen both his fury and his fear. In all the years they'd known each other, she had never seen the man drain of all colour. He was chalk white. "Say the name again," he ordered. "Voss," she confirmed. "His signature is on the entire op." Jack's eyes closed. When he opened them, they were like a frozen lake over a void. "Voss has been my commanding officer for 14 months, he said quietly. "I'm aware. He was in the room for the route planning." "I know," she affirmed. He looked at the ceiling, his hand warping the bed rail. "3 of my men," he finished, his voice hollow. "Danny Reyes, Chris Okafor, Mark Tillman." The names were like a final prayer. Danny's little girl just hit 4. The metal shrieked in his fist. Voss shook my damn hand at their service. His eyes bored into hers. The air went thick. "I need confirmation. Is the man downstairs Voss?" Jack pushed himself up. "If it's him, this is no wellness check." "No," she agreed. "But he can't touch you in here." "He won't try," she countered. "He's just here to confirm the target. The actual hit will happen somewhere else." Jack's gaze went distant, his mind running a Marine's combat analysis. She saw her own cold rationale reflected in him, a truth she couldn't face. "Can you get his name?" he demanded. "Reynolds bought us 15 minutes. We have 12 left. Move," he commanded. And she was gone. From the nurse's hub she connected to Priya. "The man at reception," she whispered. "Get a positive ID, but stay off the radar." A moment passed. Then Priya's voice, artificially casual, signalled she grasped the danger. "His credentials are on his left lapel. I have a visual. Stand by." 9 seconds crawled by. "It's Voss. Colonel Richard J. Voss." "Lena, he's not alone. There's a civilian." "Quiet type." Lena's hand balled into a fist. "Is Reynolds with him?" "Reynolds is running interference with the Colonel. Buying you time." "Good. The Colonel's patience is wearing thin." "I just need 1 more minute," Lena urged. "Create a minor, believable distraction. A pause. Consider it done." "Good." "My thanks," Lena said, and cut the comms. 11 minutes remained. She used 8 of them executing a rapid sequence of actions. In the storeroom she procured the necessary item. It was a long way from a weapon. She hadn't carried a weapon in 2.5 years, but this tool was better than nothing. Back at the station she opened Jack's file and began charting, documenting his 0800 vitals to project an air of total routine. She heard the elevator arrive, but kept her gaze down. The doors parted. The sound of 2 pairs of shoes approached. Then a voice unfamiliar, yet it carried the easy authority of a man accustomed to total obedience. It was the voice her intelligence had prepared her for. "I'm looking for Sergeant Harris in room 1, Voss announced. "I'm his C." "Oh." Lena looked up. He was in his mid-50s, with a face meant for command portraits. His service uniform was a deliberate move to dominate the space. The younger man beside him had the flat, watchful eyes of a professional handler. Reynolds was a step behind them. Lena set down her pen. "Colonel Voss," she said, "I'm Lena Foster, the nurse on Sergeant Harris's case." Voss scanned her dismissively. "I need to see my soldier," he stated. "Understood," she replied. "The sergeant is 18 hours out from major surgery. His condition is stable, but tenuous. I must consult the surgeon before allowing any visit that could cause physiological stress." Voss's face was granite. "My presence is not a stressor. I am going to see him." "Understood, sir," Lena said. Her tone was perfectly clinical, a professional firewall. "Standard protocol for any patient in his condition requires clearance from the doctor for non-essential visitors. Dr. Reynolds can confirm. She shifted her gaze to Reynolds, who immediately backed her play. That is our procedure for all sicu thoracotomy recoveries, he stated. I need to perform a quick assessment before authorizing anyone. Voss fixed him with a long, challenging stare. My security clearance supersedes your hospital rules. That may be true, Colonel, Reynolds answered, his voice unyielding. It was the tone of a man who had been making life-and-death decisions for 3 decades. But this is my intensive care unit. He is my patient. The only clearance that is relevant here is medical. He held Voss's gaze. The evaluation will be 10 minutes. You are welcome to wait. It was 09:41. Voss waited. He stood by the sicu doors, his hands clasped behind him, his face a mask. The younger man in the dark coat stood just behind, looking at nothing. Lena forced herself to continue charting. Inside room 1, Reynolds was doing his exam. Lena knew he was also talking to Jack. She couldn't know the questions or Jack's answers. She only knew Reynolds was no one's fool. The last 22 hours, her actions in the ER, her system access, the 0847 call, and now this colonel painted a clear picture. He could connect the dots. She was staking her life that he would interpret the situation correctly. At 09:49, Reynolds exited room 1. He went to the station, picked up a different patient's file, and made a notation without looking at Lena. He is not cleared for visitors, he announced, his voice just loud enough for Voss to hear. His pressure is spiking, and I have to monitor him for 1 hour before we introduce any new variables. Voss moved toward him. Doctor, I must insist. Reynolds finally looked up. His face was a locked vault. I understand your position, and I respect your concern, but Sergeant Harris is now under my care, and my medical judgment is not subject to debate or any chain of command. He set the chart on the counter. 1 hour. If his vitals have stabilized, a brief visit can be arranged. The family waiting area is available just down the hall. The silence stretched for 4 long seconds. Where is this room? Voss snapped. Lena stood. I can show you, she offered, leading him down the corridor. The handler followed. The 3 of them proceeded in a tense, sterile formation. Lena pushed open the door to the consultation room and held it. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? No, Voss cut her off. He strode inside, his shadow right behind him. Lena let the door close and walked back at a steady pace. Reynolds was at the nurse's desk, his back to her, his voice a low whisper. He was asking about Harris's cognitive function, specifically if he was coherent enough to give a formal statement. That's what I was afraid of, she breathed. The man with him made a call while you were leading them away. A 30-second window, Reynolds said. Ice filled her gut. It's more than enough time. For what? He demanded. She met his stare. This was another hard turn, a choice she couldn't take back. This intel I'm about to drop, she said quietly, will burn your old world down. You can't unhear it. This knowledge will torch your career. Her eyes drilled into his. I'm giving you an out. I can run this op alone. He assessed her for a hard moment. Give me the brief, he commanded. She ran down the situation. The ambush, the compromised intel, the kill list with the target's name, and the asset downstairs, here to gauge a threat, not to help. Reynolds' face was a stone mask to the world. But she saw the gears turning fast, shock, disbelief buckling under the weight of truth, then grim acceptance. That cold resolve was a mirror of her own. He was silent. Harris has to move, Reynolds stated flatly. Agreed. Not just another room. We exfil him. I know, she confirmed. I can transfer him to Belvoir, he said. 40 clicks from here. Medical grounds are solid. That chest wound is legit. He's wheels up in under an hour. She was floored, completely blindsided. She had expected a hand, not a full-on partner. He was jumping into the fire with her, ready to eat the fallout. "You understand what you're doing, right?" she asked. "I am transferring a patient," Reynolds retorted. "That's my duty." "Reynolds," she tried. "It is my duty," he repeated, his voice iron. "And it's a legit transfer. The man needs it." "I need 30 minutes for logistics," he said. "And you need to run interference on that colonel until the bus is here." "You'll get your 30, she promised. Her mind raced, gaming out the risks. The aid, the call, the shrinking window of time. She inventoried her assets. This maze of a hospital and the one weapon she exclusively owned. The truth. A targeted piece of it would lock Voss down harder than any guard. She headed back to the consultation room. She gave a single knock and entered. Voss looked up from the window. His aide on a phone by the wall snapped straight, the phone gone. "My apologies, Colonel," Lena started. Voss's entire posture shifted. Not warmth, she figured he wasn't capable. It was a tactical shift, adjusting to a new player. "For what?" he asked. "For the delay," she replied, taking the opposite seat without an invitation. She folded her hands, her face a mask of concern. "The fact is, Sergeant Harris himself asked me to stall you." Voss became a statue. "He's conscious," she continued, "since 0600. He's lucid, but when I said you were here." She trailed off, faking a search for words. He requested a moment. He said he wasn't ready. Her gaze locked onto Voss. "I don't have the details of what happened downrange, Colonel, but it's heavy on him. He knew 3 of the men we lost." A shadow crossed his face, gone instantly, but she saw it. She saw everything. "He is a Marine," Voss stated, his voice flat. "He is," she agreed. "And Marines don't like to admit they're struggling. It's a perceived weakness." She let the quiet linger. "Give him a bit more time. I'll take you in personally." Voss scrutinized her, his gaze drilled into her, a physical pressure. "You're quite invested in this man," his look said. "I'm good at my job," she shot back with her own. "Your first week?" he pressed. A challenge. She met it. "Yes. And you're personally running this SEALs case?" "I was his lead in surgery yesterday. He trusts me." "Which is a tactical advantage," she added. A long, calculated stare. Voss finally leaned back. "You have 15 minutes." "Thank you," she replied, standing. "I'll get you when he's ready." She exited the room. Down the hall, her walk was controlled, her face a mask. The moment she rounded the corner, she broke into a run. She made a beeline for room 1. Reynolds was inside, talking low and fast to Jack, tablet in hand. Jack's eyes snapped to Lena the second she came in. "How long?" 15 minutes tops," she said. "Reynolds is handling the transfer." "Fort Belvoir," Reynolds added. "Got a specialist there. Orders are cooking." He faced Jack. "Can you manage a 40-minute bus ride?" Jack looked at Lena. "His vitals are steady." She confirmed the chest tube sights were secure. "If we strap down the drain and keep him flat, the risk is acceptable." "Your definition of acceptable?" Jack challenged. "Better than being a sitting duck," she countered. Their eyes met. "Do it." Reynolds left with a quiet, urgent stride. Lena prepped him for transport, securing lines for the 40-minute ride. "The guy with Voss," Jack said. "Young, dark jacket. He's no Marine," Jack stated. "Not active anyway. His stance is off, but he's had training. The way he hugged that wall, watching the exit." He paused. "He's a contractor." "Voss brought in a ghost," Jack said. Lena filed the intel away, her hands steady. "So Voss is off the books." "Which means he's spooked," Jack said. "Men like him only hire private muscle when they're scared." His voice became iron. "He knows that I know." "He can't know how much," Lena offered. He'll assume the worst, Jack countered. Which is exactly what it is. 10:23. 11 minutes gone. Marcus entered. He saw the transport set up, and his confusion became a silent question. "Marcus, I need your help," Lena said. "Figured," he answered. "Go to the consult room. Tell the colonel Dr. Reynolds needs him on 2 for intake forms. It's standard protocol. A total fabrication. Buy me 6 more minutes." Marcus looked from her to Jack, then back to her. "I told you I'd explain by noon," she said. "It's 10:23, he replied. "I know." The silence was thick. Then he squared his shoulders, fixed his ID, and left, the picture of routine, a perfect play. Lena breathed out and refocused. "You trust him," Jack observed. "I trust what's in front of me," she replied. That's it. 10:31. Reynolds was at the window, hand up, 5 fingers. 5 minutes. She turned to Jack. "When they get here, let them work. Don't move, don't fight. Don't pull a single line." "I know how to be a patient," he retorted. "It's not in your DNA," she said. His lip twitched, a near smile gone in a flash, igniting something she instantly extinguished. "Lena." He said her name just like he did last night, tasting the sound of it. "What's the objective after Belvoir?" "One step at a time," she deflected. "That's not an objective." "It's the only play we've got," she answered. Finishing the last line, she observed him, the tech, the chest that defied all odds, by still breathing. "After Belvoir, you recover. Then we figure out what's next, together." He said it like a mission order. She looked at him. She thought of the simple quiet she had built. The life inside a nurse's ID, a locker, and a 7 a.m. start time. She remembered the 2.5 years spent building a safe, small world. She saw that name on the list. She saw Danny Reyes and his daughter, turning 4 in October. "Yes," she said. Together. 10:37. The transport team arrived, filling the room with professional focus. They moved Jack Harris like he was irreplaceable. Down the corridor, Marcus was running interference with bogus paperwork. Lena walked beside the gurney to the service elevator, her hand inches from his, close but not touching, a proximity that meant you weren't letting go. The elevator doors parted. She stepped on. The car began its descent, a blind machine. Lena stood by the gurney, hand on the rail, eyes locked on the team's monitors. She watched his numbers, just as she had since his arrival. The data wasn't the full picture, but it was the baseline, and the baseline was everything. Blood pressure at 96/62, heart rate 71, SATs at 93, and holding. His gaze was on the elevator ceiling, but it wasn't vacant. His eyes had the same tactical scan as before. He was still running the problem. But beneath that, she saw a flicker of something she knew well from her own past. It was that specific relief of clearing the danger zone and the bone-deep weariness that follows. "Your pressure is up 2 points," she noted. "I can feel it," he answered. "Good. Good," he confirmed. "Feels like I'm still in the fight." The hatch hissed open onto the lower deck P-way. The detail was squared away. 2 corpsmen, 1 gearhead, all business. Lena kept tight on Jack's 6. The passageway led straight to the motor pool. She clocked it without thinking, a 42-second haul to the ramp. The ramp dropped, spilling in the pre-dawn chill. Jack Harris was now outside the wire, a world away from the sterile medbay. Lena felt him tense, the air crackling around him. "Frosty," he grunted. "It's March," she replied. "I can read a damn calendar," he rasped. "Then don't bitch about it." A ghost of a smirk. "Roger that." They got him secured, and she swung in behind. The lead corpsman, a burly dude named Torres with faded ink, eyed her credentials, weighing the odds. "You his next of kin?" Torres asked. I'm his medical escort, she replied. This Cassavac ain't manifested for an escort. Manifests updated, she clipped back. Torres held her gaze, then gave a slight nod. He was a guy who knew when to stand down. He dogged the hatch shut 10:44 hours. The Humvee rumbled out of the compound. Back in the sea, O's office, Marcus was out of rope. He knew the jig was up the second Colonel Voss got to his feet, his voice strained with manufactured calm. "You're done stonewalling me." Marcus met his gaze. "Sir, give me a sit-rep. Now," Voss ordered, the words a thinly veiled threat. He smelled a rat. This was just protocol before he tore the barracks apart. Marcus said nothing. Voss blew out of the office, his spook already talking into his sat phone. He stormed the trauma bay, shoving into stall 1. He saw it through the plexiglass, an empty rack, dead screens, gear piled on the deck. He stared, frozen for a hard 4 count. He spun toward the duty desk. A greenhorn corpsman stared back, bug-eyed. "The Marine, in stall 1. Where is he?" Voss barked. "Medivase, sir," the kid squeaked. "Bugged out maybe 15 mics ago. Destination?" Voss ground out. "It's all in the paperwork, Colonel," Reynolds stated, materializing in the hatchway. In his civvies, holding a datapad, he projected pure authority, locking Voss down with that same steel gaze. He owned the space, backed by 3 decades as a Navy doc. "Landstuhl," Reynolds said, "for a chest wound consult, all by the book and non-negotiable." He offered the datapad, the transfer orders. Voss's fury went ice cold and deadly. Voss glared at the doc, then flicked a glance at his man. A slight headshake confirmed it. The bird was in the wind. "This isn't over," Voss growled, a promise of pain for everyone involved. Reynolds didn't flinch. Voss spun on his heel and stalked out, his shadow close behind. When the lift doors closed, the whole medbay seemed to unclench. Reynolds crossed to the comm station and punched in a secure line. 3 rings, then a click. "Commander James Reynolds, Medical Corps," he said. "Patch me through to the IG's office. I have intel on a security compromise and I'm lodging a formal complaint." The line was dead quiet for a moment. "Affirmative. I'll hold." While he was on standby, 40 clicks down the road, Lena's burner phone buzzed. A response from a number she'd pinged at 0715. A ghost contact, Sims, dormant for over 2 years. The message: "Copy. Wheels up. Protect the package." Lena read it once and pocketed the phone. "Good news?" Jack asked. "Yeah," she said. "The ball's rolling." "Whose ball?" "Someone way above Voss's pay grade," she answered. They were just waiting for the green light. "That AAR you submitted," she began. "What was the routing?" "Straight to the IG." "Jumped the chain of command," he admitted. "Call it a hunch." "A damn good one," she said. "Your intel drop lit the fuse. The data I snagged. Makes the whole thing airtight. It's rock solid." "Solid for what?" he asked. "To put Voss in a corner he can't get out of," she said. "His puppet masters can't sweep this. 2 separate, credible sources with the same story." Jack went quiet, staring at the blurred highway. Up front, Torres drove while the tech tweaked the Otto. Just another pro doing his job. "Danny Reyes," Jack murmured. "Chris Okafor," Mark Tillman. "I know," Lena said. "This is for them," he rasped. "Not for the higher-ups, not for some file, for them." "I know," she echoed softly. He looked at her, his hand clenching the blanket. She placed hers near his, just being there. It was how she'd been in the trauma bay, a steady presence. No bullshit. He reached for her hand. She took it. 11:22 hours. Landstuhl. The CSH took them in with military precision. Everything prepped and waiting. Reynolds' contact, a surgeon named Anan, was on the ramp. He had the quiet confidence of a master craftsman. He took over Jack's case with a calm command that settled Lena's nerves. She fell back, letting him work. She stayed on the edge of the chaos, a quiet overwatch, making sure the handoff was clean. Anand caught her eye from across the bay. "You're the one who caught the tension pneumothorax?" "That's affirmative," she said. Anand glanced at the forwarded scans. "Good catch," he said. "Another 20 mics, and he'd be in a body bag." "I know," she replied. "You sticking around?" he asked. She looked at Jack, who was taking the poking and prodding like a stone. "For a bit." At 12:17, her burner chirped in the P-way. "Not Sims?" Blocked number. The protocol was second nature, a ghost from her former life. She paused, centered herself, and hit accept. "Foster," she answered. "Miss." "Foster," a clipped professional voice replied, straight out of a skiff. "My identity is irrelevant. Your intel, corroborated by Sergeant Harris's statement, was acted upon at 11:45 local." "What's the response time?" Lena asked. "Immediate," the voice said. "The subject has been confined to quarters. Notification in 20 mics. His handler is also on the radar." Lena exhaled slowly. "He'll call Jag." "He will," the voice affirmed. "The best they've got. But our case is solid." A brief silence. "Miss Foster, we're read in on your history. Your current cover remains intact." "Meaning what?" Lena pressed. "Meaning Nurse Lena Foster keeps clocking in. Your old jacket stays buried. But today's work has been logged." Another pause. "We appreciate you stepping up." The line clicked off. Lena stood frozen for a second, then slid the phone away and headed back inside. Jack's eyes found hers. Anand's people were gone. It was just him, wired to new monitors showing the same steady rhythm. He had that same look, the raw honesty of a man who's been to the edge and back. "So?" he asked. "It's done," she confirmed, and it was quick. His eyes demanded details. "Voss was relieved of command this morning. Full investigation is a go." It was vindication, pure and simple. The kind a man needs when his sacrifice has to count for something. The names he'd uttered, Danny, Chris, Mark, they wouldn't get lost in some classified, blacked-out report. There would be payback. His jaw tightened. He gripped the rack's rail, knuckles white. A long minute ticked by. "Okay," he finally breathed out, the word thick with everything he couldn't say. "Okay," she echoed, dragging a chair over. The only sound was the steady beep of the monitors. It was the quiet after the firefight, with the long, hard road to recovery stretching out ahead. "And you?" Jack asked. "What's your next move?" She thought of the base hospital, the managed chaos of the trauma bay, Marcus's solid leadership, Priya's quiet competence, and Reynolds, who'd bet his career on her. "I go back to my post," she said. "That's all? Just back?" "It's not just," she countered, "but yeah." He watched her with those storm grey eyes. "And what's the plan for Harris?" he asked. "Harris, heels up." She said it like a fact. "Doc Annan is top tier, and Harris is the hardest son of a bitch I know. You survived yesterday, you'll survive this." She met his gaze. "Then you figure out your next objective. Just like the rest of us." "But what if my next objective involves the woman named Foster?" The question was quiet, no theatrics, but it hit like a hammer blow. He wasn't a man for games. She held his gaze, thinking about the quiet cover she'd built. She remembered him rasping her old call sign, half delirious. She remembered whispering his name in reply. "That's a debrief for when you're not wired to a machine and full of someone else's blood," she sidestepped. "That's not a no," he observed. "No," she conceded quietly, "it wasn't." The edge of his lip curled up. She glanced away. At 13:48, her phone vibrated. Reynolds. She took the call in the passageway. "I've spoken with the IG," Reynolds said, his voice as calm as ever. "They have my statement. A formal inquiry is underway." "I know," she said. "Got word about 20 mics back. It's in motion." A pause. "You have sources." "Had sources," she corrected. "Seems a few are still active." "Lena," he started, her name sounding different now. It held the weight of a man who'd crossed a line and was staring at the fallout. "Do I need to worry about my people after this?" "No." Her tone was iron. This shitstorm was contained to Corporal Harris. He brought it here, it didn't start in this AO. "It ends here. But the fallout is on you," he noted. She mulled that over. "Until the debrief is final. Then it's over for me too." A longer silence. "Priya figured you for some kind of spook," Reynolds said. A dry laugh almost surfaced. "What'd you tell her?" "That you're one hell of a corpsman," he said. "Which is true." "No," she conceded. "That part's squared away." "We could use you back," he said. "The ER is a freaking war zone." "Tomorrow morning," she promised. 0700, he stated. 0700, she confirmed. She cut the call and leaned against the bulkhead, eyes closed. The hospital's hum was a constant drone, a machine indifferent to the chaos inside its guts. She allowed herself a single moment to process the last 26 hours. Radio crackle, the Marine on the gurney, the hiss of a needle yanking a soul back from the abyss. A name in the dark, a hand gripping hers, a keycard, a call, and Marcus ready for a fight. 3 names, ghosts breathed at the ceiling as his knuckles turned white on the bed rail. She let the echoes die. Pushing off the wall, she went back inside. He was out cold, a shallow truce won by a body that finally overran his mind. His breathing was steady, his right hand flat on the wool blanket, the burn scar livid under the light. From the foot of his rack, her gaze followed the green, digital pulse of his life. His chest rose and fell, the raw will of a body that refused to break. Reynolds was right. She was a damn good nurse. She was also something else, an older weapon she'd tried to shelve, sharpened by years of surviving hostile ground. Yesterday wasn't her up. She hadn't gone looking for this fight. Showing up at Metro Health Military 6 minutes early, she'd only wanted a quiet post. The universe, per usual, had other plans. She'd stopped being surprised by that. She was done apologizing for what she was built to do. She pulled the chair closer and stood her watch. She was there at 0300 and again at 04. When Jack surfaced at 0422 and found her watching, she just held his gaze. His eyes locked on hers, the room's low hum, a field dressing on the silence as the day bled out. At 1717, a text from her Arlington asset buzzed. 2 words, Voss secured. She stowed the phone and looked at Jack. "It's done," she said. He didn't blink. She saw the intel land, a round sinking into the deep, cold water where Danny, Chris, and Mark lived. The place where Voss, the convoy route, and the kill box were burned into his memory. She watched his jaw harden, his throat tight as he absorbed the full weight of it. He took it all, not by making the pain smaller, but by standing his ground against it. "Okay," he breathed, the word a full magazine. "Okay," she confirmed. She reached out, her hand covering his. He didn't have to meet her halfway this time. Lena Foster started the day, a rookie nurse. She ended it as something else, ancient and more complete than she'd been in years. She was a woman who knew you don't choose between the life you have and the one you left. The healer was Riet. The shadow was real. They both served the same mission. Stand between good people and the things that want to hurt them. She'd done it yesterday with a syringe and 2 quiet words. She'd do it again tomorrow. And she'd be at Metro Health at 0700, on the dot. because that was all of her now. The whole damn package, no regrets. The mission, in all its forms, was never over. It just changed the terrain, and Lena Foster had never been afraid of the ground she stood on.